Hi, I'm Spiders, a top 50 Gale Min, and in this video, I will be making my updated Galebreathe mantra tier list. Now, I have made a Gale mantra tier list in the past, however, the meta has shifted a lot since then with many balance changes and also a new Gale mantra, so I felt it was worth making an updated video. With that out of the way, let's get into it. Okay, so starting off we have Rising Wind. Now Rising Wind is definitely one of my favorite Gale mantras, super powerful, and I would say it's honestly like, this is the mantra that makes Gale combos. Without Rising Wind, Gale combos would be so much harder and so much more lame, so it's definitely going to be pretty high up here. And I would say top of A tier probably. Super strong mantra for sure, and if you remember to use reverse Gale kick, you can pretty much guarantee almost like a bar of damage at least every time you land this. Especially if you know how to do your combos right. So really, if you're playing an aggressive Gale loadout for sure, just like I saw in my last video, definitely pick up Rising Wind. If you want to get good combos, pick up Rising Wind. And a very solid Gale mantra. I'd say it's around the top of A tier for sure, definitely high up there. But admittedly, it does take some skill to use with knowing how to use them with uppercuts and hits then and all that stuff, so top of A tier for now. And next up we have Gale Wisp. Now Gale Wisp, really like, the Gale Wisp was so bad, it fell off so hard after the nerfs like a while back. And you probably won't even notice this change that reduces the amount of perfect casts needed to proc onto Gale. And let's not even talk about the fall damage, bro. That is so terrible, especially when half the Gale mantras disable fall damage anyways, and there's also talents as well. So Gale Wisp is definitely bottom of D tier, not good at all. Would not recommend using it. Maybe devs could buff it one day, that'd be cool. Okay, so next up we have Tornado. Now Tornado, I'd say it's not great right now, mostly because of its slow speed. Some people do say it's good for mage builds, like I think I included that in my last video as well, but honestly, it's just hard to get any value of it when it's so slow. And also, it activates when you use an M1, which is kind of annoying because you M1 a lot in fights normally, so it'll just randomly go forward when you're not completely ready for it yet. So maybe if they made it so that like, if you use the mantra again, it moves Tornado forward, but not very strong at all, so probably C tier I'd say, but yeah, hard to get any value from it these days. Okay, so next up we have Heavenly Wind. Now definitely a very versatile mantra. You can use it for mobility, use it for damage, use it for posture damage, all of that. I would say it takes a little bit of skill to use because you have to be able to figure out how to take advantage of its feints and also learn the move stacking bugs, you know, all that has a lot with it, so it's a pretty high skill cap mantra in my opinion. But if you learn how to use it effectively, I'd say it can be pretty strong. It's also pretty good for tracking since you can aim wherever you want on the ground, all that, so I say it's probably an A tier, probably on the lower end of A tier just because it's harder to use, and it's also very punishable by your opponent if your opponent knows what they're doing and you screw up with Heavenly Wind, so I think A tier is pretty fair for it. Okay, next up we have Air Force. So Air Force, I actually think Air Force is kind of underrated since I don't really see people using it much in Top Chime, but it's honestly fairly quick and often people can miss the sound cue since people aren't used to dealing with this mantra, so top of B tier maybe, pretty high up. Also does decent damage and it can be huge if you put on modifiers on it. So a solid mantra in my opinion. If you want to be the person that uses underrated mantras, maybe Air Force is an option. But I will say that something that holds it back from being A and S tier is that it is kind of easy to parry if your opponent gets used to it. And especially if people ever start using this mantra more and it gets more common, then I think it won't be that hard to deal with once people learn how to fight against this, so we'll just keep it in top of B tier for now. Alright, so next we have Champion's Whirlthrow. Now I put Champion's Whirlthrow in S tier in my last tier list, but honestly, that was right after the change where it got its windup reduction, so we couldn't really tell just how impactful that was. So I thought it was still pretty decent even after that nerf, but honestly, it is really hard to land it against good players unless you have really specific situations that take a lot of work or reading your opponent really well. So it's honestly really hard for me to put it in S tier again. I definitely can't do that now. But as a Galebreathe mantra, I still think it's pretty strong, and it definitely does have its use cases, although for sure it takes way more skill, way more work to do than before the changes, so I'd say bottom of A tier. Okay, so next up we have Astral Wind. Astral Wind is the core of Galebreathe. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows it as the 3-star Gale mantra. I mean, there's these two as well, but you know, they're not really on the same level. So Astral Wind definitely going to be an S tier. It did get nerfed. Pretty noticeable change that reduced its wind-up speed, but I still think it's really quick and really good and does lots of damage as well. So Astral Wind has always been really strong. It's still really strong, and in my opinion, still one of the best Gale mantras for sure. Almost everyone should use this. Just make sure you try and put 3 rush shards, 3 drift shards on it if possible. If you don't have enough ether, then maybe just 3 rush shards, and this will be a very good mantra for pretty much everyone that uses Gale. So for sure, definitely an easy S tier for me. Alright, so next up we have Gale Trap. Now Gale Trap, people have mixed opinions about it because it's kind of janky the way it works with going through people's blocks and sticking on your opponent for a little bit. In my opinion, I'd say that it's maybe like on the lower end of B tier because it's not super threatening, so your opponent doesn't actually have to block if they don't want to. It does apply Suffocate, which is good, and maybe if you can take advantage of pressuring your opponent while they're blocking it, then it can be alright, but just not a super impactful mantra in general, so I can't really put it higher than this. So I'd say B tier is pretty fair for it. And next is one of the newer mantras, which is Windforge. Windforge was pretty bad when it first released, but then it got a buff which made it so you can actually do stuff while Wind Force is being casted, and it does slow down your opponent a lot. People don't really talk about that much, but the slow is really heavy, and it's kind of like being dazed, so maybe this is a way to take advantage of it that people haven't figured out yet. So I think if some of these top Gale launchers get nerfed, then eventually people might start using Windforge, so I'll put it in the bottom of A tier for now. Pretty underrated in my opinion, and can actually bring you some value for sure. So maybe try this out if you don't like some of these up here. And here we have the new Gale Thunder Hybrid mantra Tempest Blitz. And this mantra also did get buffed recently, made it a little bit faster, and I think it's pretty solid overall because it has pretty good mobility. Posture damage is okay, nothing crazy. So maybe on the lower end of A tier. One thing I will say, I don't think this is super good for PvP because it's just too slow. I mean, you can't kind of mix up with fainting it in the middle of it and not going through the full animation, but maybe if you did more posture damage would be better. It's just not threatening. Pretty strong for mobility, so I think it's still worth keeping in A tier. Alright, so next up we have Pillars of Erisia. Pillars of Erisia, honestly I'd say it's kind of too slow to be used effectively in PvP. Now it does have a pretty big area, so I think it's decent in overworld, but honestly the speed is just really bad. Like throughout the entire animation, it's pretty unlikely that you're not going to be hit once. And if your opponent knows what they're doing, they'll just dodge it and punish you pretty hard for it. So can't really put it that high up. So for now it's going to be in C tier. Although maybe on a mage build where you just sit back and far enough away from your opponent that they can't punish, you can be alright. And maybe in overworlds it can be okay for blood sealing, but those are not super reliable, and this is not strong in ones at all. So for now it's going to be in C tier. And next up we have Wind Gun. Now Wind Gun, I wouldn't say it's the best mantra right now because it still has a pretty small hitbox and it's kind of slow and also hard to combo off of because of the ragdolls. So I think I'm also going to put this in C tier. Maybe the Suffocate is alright, but definitely does not compare to any of these stronger mantras in my opinion, so it'll stay down here for now. And here we have Wind Carve. Wind Carve used to be really strong versus 1 meta back in the day. Pretty popular after the Lightborn tournament. Cannot put it super high because after the several nerfs, it really fell off. And now, like if you use it, someone can just hit you through it. And because the duration of Wind Carve lasts pretty long, you can just get hit over and over again before the mantra's even done. So pretty low in my opinion. For now, it's going to be definitely near the bottom for sure. I'd say in D tier because of how hard you can get punished. Pretty weak mantra. Maybe you could argue C tier if you have some sort of tech for it. But at the moment, there's nothing that's really caught on regarding that aspect of the mantra, so D tier. And next up is Tornado. Tornado I had it in B tier last time, but in my opinion, I think I should have put it lower because honestly, it is so slow and you stay in the air for a long time too, so you can also get punished really hard. And it's also really hard to aim because of how small the hitbox is too. So this is going to be in C tier. Okay, so next up we have Gale Lunge. Now Gale Lunge, it's a pretty common staple of Galebreathe, especially in the overworld, since it's really good for chasing people. And also I'd say it's pretty good in one, since it has really nice feint potential with its animation and windup, and also very helpful for sticking to your opponent and making sure that they're near you at all times. Another good thing about Gale Lunge is that it can be pretty hard to tell when you will actually be hit by it, since you're moving a lot when using this mantra, so that's another benefit of it as well. So for these reasons, it's probably going to be in the pretty high end of A tier. I'd say around here, but not S tier in my opinion, because I wouldn't say it's like a game-breaking mantra like Astral Wind or even Rising Wind. Being S tier has to be really insane, so some people were asking why I didn't put it in S tier last time, and that's sort of my reasoning for why. Don't get me wrong, it's a really good mantra, but I wouldn't say it's as insane as something like Astral Wind, even though it is really good. Alright, so next up is Windblade. Now Windblade, people have been using it more recently, especially in the overworld with a wayward gem kind of like Nogo does, which is kind of what popularized it in my opinion. But honestly, I think it's pretty bad in ones. It is so easy to parry once you get used to it, and it really doesn't do a lot of damage. So some people think it's underrated, some people still use it, and you can definitely have success with it. But honestly, I think you should really be using one of these stronger Gale monsters instead, which is why I don't want to put it any higher than this. So maybe top of B tier. And also I will say that there is a talent that some people like with Tempest Wind, but it's just not super effective. I haven't really seen anyone in top time using it, and probably not going to be any higher than that. And here we have the recently nerfed Gale Punch. And I actually was planning on putting it on A tier before the nerf, but now you can't really abuse its free posture damage like before. So it's for sure going to be lower than that. It is still pretty good because it actually does do a lot of damage, and if it is blocked, it does do a lot of posture damage as well. But now it's pretty much just the normal mantras, so can't really put it high up on the level of these mantras, so probably just in C tier. Does do a lot of damage, but hard to hit as well. C tier it is. And last up we have Gale's mobility mantra, Wind Passage. Now Wind Passage, very strong in my opinion actually. Pretty similar to Dash I'd say. Especially if you put 3 perfect lenses on it, which you should if you're using it for mobility. And something people don't really talk about much is that it does do a lot of damage as well. So sometimes there are some situations where you can use that to your advantage, like if your opponent's caught lacking just like in some long animation. So for sure, pretty solid mantra. As you would expect, very good for mobility. So we're going to put it in a pretty respectable A tier for now. Okay, so some last changes that I'd like to make before finishing up this tier list is I think I'm going to move Tornado Cake down to D tier actually, because really, Tornado Cake is so ineffective. It is so hard to aim, so slow. So I can't even put it on the level of these monsters, I'd say. I think D tier is really where it should be. And one more small thing I'd like to change. I think I'll put Gale Punch at the top of C tier because damage is actually pretty good. So I think it's still better than Wind Gun. But yeah, nothing crazy here. Alright, so thanks for watching and let me know. Do you disagree with any of my opinions here? Like and subscribe for more Top Go content, and I'll see you in the next one.